This is Only the Strong Survive, a podcast powered by Con Media, where we dive deep into the world of business, leadership, and innovation. I'm your host, Dan Con, and I'm honored to have you join us today. So, let's get ready to learn some survival skills together. Hey everybody, it's Dan Con with Only the Strong Survive podcast, powered by Con Media and Tread Agency. Before we get into the latest episode, I want to talk to you for a minute about my new book, The New Rules of the Road, How to Navigate the Rapidly Changing Marketing Landscape. The book came out in early 2025, and it is already a #1 bestseller in 7 different categories, including the #1 book about communications and the #1 book about public relations and marketing on Amazon. And it's now available also on barnesandnoble.com. So if you haven't picked it up yet, you can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Barnes & Noble. Just search for The New Rules of the Road by Dan Con. Thank you so much for the support. It would not be a #1 bestseller without you and for your support on the show, of the book, and everything we do. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Only the Strong Survive, powered by Con Media and Tread Agency. This is Dan Con, and today I am honored to welcome Tim Parkhurst, the founding president of the Marine Scout Sniper Heritage Foundation. With a 25-year Marine Corps career spanning 4 wars, Tim is dedicated to preserving the 105-year legacy of the Marine Scout Snipers, honoring their sacrifices, and leading efforts to build a memorial at Quantico. Since retiring in 2014, he's worked with veteran organizations and founded the Heritage Foundation to ensure their history is never forgotten. So, Tim, right off the bat, thank you, and we appreciate your service, and thanks for being on.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I really appreciate it. It's great to be here. It's an honor for me.
So I guess just to start, before we even get into your foundation, what is a Marine Scout Sniper? What is that?
Well, that's a great question. So I'm going to try not to mess this up, or all my peers are gonna crush me. So we have a definition that we learn in school, and it's been many, many years since I attended school. So a Scout Sniper is a Marine who's highly trained in field skills and marksmanship, who delivers long-range precision fire on selected targets from concealed positions. A better way of saying that is just that everybody knows what a sniper is somebody who can take, a precise shot at distance, right? But a scout sniper, if you think of just the word scout by itself, it's someone who goes out and collects information on the enemy and reports it, and goes out, into the battle space to see what's happening. We're combining those two things in one person with a scout sniper. That's kind of what a scout sniper is. And the concept of that came around in World War I, and we actually got the term, the word scout and sniper, being used together to describe that one person for the first time back in World War I from the Canadians.
Wow. Okay. So is this like a guy in a ghillie suit that's just like sitting there and observing and reporting back? And so it's like a recon plus sniper? Is that?
Yeah, it can be. Ghillie suits are great for some environments, not for others. We're sometimes very mobile, sometimes very static. There's a lot of patience involved. Sometimes, in an urban environment, we might be set up in a building somewhere and might be operating in and out of that building for days at a time. Or we might be, like you say, in a ghillie suit out in the jungle or the forest or whatever. Once we take a shot, typically, we're not going to occupy that site for very long, generally speaking, because now the enemy has an idea that somebody's there. So we would displace and go somewhere else and have that built into our plan. Yeah, a lot of sneaking around and long-range shooting.
That's a high risk, sounds like high stress gig. So how did you get involved in the Corps, and kind of tell us your story a little bit? When did you go in and why, and then tell us a little bit about your experience.
I went to high school last 3 years. As a sophomore, I went to the Marine Military Academy down in Texas, and it's the only private military school patterned after the Marine Corps. My grandfather, when he passed away, left us some education money, and public school and I didn't get along real well. So my dad thought the structure of a military school might help. And it did. We used that money to send me, and it was a great experience. And some of the old salty Marines who were my role models there, Vietnam era guy, Master Sergeant John McLaughlin, Sergeant Major Harvey Gilmore, these guys were my instructors, my mentors. And very quickly, I found myself wanting to be like them. And so it was kind of a natural progression that when, it came time to figure out what I'm going to do post-graduation, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be a Marine. Of course, back in the early 80s, there was a book that came out written by Charles Henderson about Carlos Hathcock, the famous sniper from Vietnam. I read that book along with most of my classmates, and I'm like, that's what I'm doing. There wasn't anything special about me that make you think that I could do it, but I really wanted to. I wanted to be a Marine. I wanted to be a grunt. I wanted to be a scout sniper. So thankfully for me, all that sort of fell into place, and I was able to do it. I went to the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines out of Camp Pendleton, got lucky and took the indoctrination for the surveillance and target acquisition platoon back in 1990. Shortly thereafter, they assigned me to the platoon, had a chance to go to sniper school, and I graduated. And there you go. Being shorthanded as the Marine Corps infantry typically is, not in wartime. This was peacetime, obviously, back in the early 90s. Guys who were relatively junior were filling responsibilities, a couple pay grades above their rank. The day I graduated from sniper school, I became the chief scout sniper for my platoon. So I remember sitting out in my car after graduation, getting ready to drive back from the ceremony back to my unit. It was a sunny day, and I had an old 69 Buick Wildcat convertible, and I was sitting in that thing with the top down, the sun's out, birds are chirping, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, what have I got myself into? I don't know what I'm doing. Sniper school prepared me just well enough to know what I didn't know. Right. And so I was terrified. Of course, I didn't tell anybody that. And, you don't share that with very many people.
And how old were you at that point?
Gosh, how old was I? About 23, 22.
And this is early 90s. So this is around like Desert Shield.
Well, so I graduated right after. I came to the platoon before Desert Storm. I actually had gone to school like right before Desert Storm. Units were already deploying, and our class got interrupted because of it. And so we didn't graduate. And I went back again in 91 after the war and graduated.
Oh, so did they send you over there and then you came back and went back to the school? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I had to do it over again. So that was fun.
Oh, wow. So you started and then they send you, what, I assume over to Kuwait or something like that. And then you come back and.
Yeah, I deployed with the 5th Marine Expeditionary Brigade aboard ship. We floated over and stopped in Hawaii and the Philippines on the way over. And, the war happened and it was over in about a minute. Then we headed back and picked up training again. So, because we didn't have the opportunity to graduate, even though we had done most of the course, we had to start the whole thing over again.
Was that frustrating having to go through it again, or was it okay?
Yeah, I mean, sure it was, but it was, I was just happy to be there, It's one of those things that guys just want to do. And any way you can get there, it's like, I got to get there. You'll give up all sorts of things to have an opportunity like that.
And out of curiosity, what are the weapon systems you're using back then to go through the long range stuff?
So back then it was the M40A1. The M40 series of rifles were all based on the Remington 700 bolt action. It started in Vietnam, 1966, with the first M40, which was basically just a factory built 308 rifle from Remington that had a heavy varmint barrel on it and a walnut stock, and they slapped a Redfield 3x9 scope on the thing.
Wood furniture, so like it's heavy, like you're humping that thing around. Okay.
And it's in the jungle, so wood soaks up moisture, right? So you got to figure guys were having lots of problems with that, in Vietnam. That rifle lasted for the war effort, and post-Vietnam, they got rid of them all, started tearing them apart. They saved a bunch of the receivers and then bought a lot of new receivers to build the A1, and Macmillan had developed a fiberglass stock. You may have seen pictures of it. It's sort of a camouflage pattern. They also, in the late 70s, Nerdle scope company developed a fixed 10-power scope specifically for the Marine Corps for that rifle. Essentially, it's the same gun, but it had all new stuff on it. That's what I carried. So I had the Nerdle 10 power on a Macmillan fiberglass stock. And my receiver was what they call a 6-digit. So, the serial numbers have so many digits. And the very first group of rifles that they purchased back in 1966 were all 6-digit serial numbers because they were the very first Remington 700s. They were low serial numbers. The ones that we carried at my unit, they were all 6-digit receivers, which means that all of those had been to Vietnam. So I'm there in the early 90s carrying a gun that the receiver had actually been to Vietnam.
Wow. 20 or 30 years earlier. To be honest, that's my hunting rifle is based on a Rem 700. So that technology really still hasn't changed. But with a 308 10 power fixed scope, like what kind of range are we talking about when you're coming out of the program? Like the school? Are you going out to how far out?
1,000 yards. Yeah.
Wow. And I assume you're calculating like windage and bullet drop. You're doing all that in your head, I assume, right? There's no computer back then or anything.
Yeah, no computers. It was all manual. We kept a data book and we kept a patrol log. And so, you always have something to write on. So you're keeping track of your dope, the wind, what it's doing, and your adjustments and all that sort of thing. So, you got some sort of a written record, what your gun has done in the past in this kind of weather, at that range, specific wind conditions and stuff. And you just apply that same dope every time. That's the theory anyway. They were good rifles, they got beat up a lot. Grunts can break everything, right? No matter how bulletproof it is, we'll break it. As durable as those rifles are, guys would still find ways to damage them, and sometimes the scopes wouldn't hold their adjustment properly. So you might adjust it and it'd be on, but a couple shots later, after it vibrates a little bit, now it's off again because it just doesn't hold a zero anymore.
How long after you came out of the program and you graduated did you go overseas?
I actually did my Desert Storm deployment before I I had graduated the program. So that was, the year prior to me graduating the course. I deployed as a assistant team leader with State Platoon 35. That was the only combat deployment as a scout sniper that I ever did. In the grand scheme of my career of 25 years, I was only a scout sniper for about 3 years.
Okay.
And then I did a couple more deployments peacetime, and I got out of the Marine Corps in 93, spent 5 years of broken time, came back in 98, and the Marine Corps, in their infinite wisdom, decided to make me a parachute rigger, which is a guy that jumps out of planes and packs parachutes and rigs cargo for airdrop and stuff like that. Had absolutely nothing to do with my former life. It was different, but I had a good career. But obviously, that time that I spent as a scout sniper was special to me, and that was mainly because of the caliber of the individuals that I served with. They were fantastic young men, every one of them. I would have put them up against anybody any day of the week. We were very tight knit, very close, as units like that tend to be. Probably the highlight of my career. Got to do a lot of cool things in 25 years, but that had to be right there at the top of the list.
That's really cool. So tell us about, where in your career and in your life did you decide to start this foundation? So tell us about the Marine Scout Sniper Heritage Foundation, and where did the genesis of that idea come from, and how did that all come about?
I told you about the broken time, that 5 years that I was out. That was a tough time for me. When I came back in, honestly, I didn't realize it at that time. It took me a long time. It took me about another 10 years to figure out how bad it actually had been. I was kind of on the verge of becoming a statistic, and I didn't know it. And coming back in the Marine Corps and getting back into that same box, that I was familiar with, the same environment that I had been in, was really kind of a saving grace, if you will. I was kind of self-destructing on the outside. I didn't even know it. And then years down the road, I was looking back, and now I'm, a more senior Marine, and I'm looking at retirement, and I'm thinking to myself, holy crap, that was a really bad time. I don't want to do that again. What do I have to do different to not do that? I was on a deployment in Afghanistan in 2010 and 11, 3-4 years before I retired. And it occurred to me that, it's all about the mission. We're so mission focused and driven in the military. And if I don't have some kind of mission that means something to me when I get out, I'm just going to flounder. And that's really what happened to me the first time around. And so I started thinking to myself, okay, I'll be proactive this time, and I'm going to try to find some sort of a nonprofit thing, some kind of organization, that I can, give my time and effort to, that adds value to the world, that makes me feel better about myself, like I'm contributing. And so there were a couple different things that I did for the first few years. Got my feet wet in a nonprofit world, served as a director on an organization's board, started a local chapter of an organization out there near Camp Lejeune. And then, at some point, I think it was around 2017 or so, I was at SHOT Show in Las Vegas. I was walking down the hall, and there was a sign next to this one big meeting room, and it said USMC Scout Sniper Association annual meeting. I was like, wait a minute, I'm a member of that. I didn't know they were having an annual meeting. So I went in and sat down for the meeting. And next thing you know, I'm kind of reconnecting with a bunch of guys that are like me, kind of reminded me of that fantastic time that I had in the Marine Corps and those incredible men that I served with. I didn't just jump right in then. It took me about another year before, somebody asked me if I would be interested in stepping up. And so I did, and I joined the board, and one thing led to another. And I ended up being, after a few months, I was the COO. And then after another 6 months or so, I ended up becoming the president. It was sort of by default. We were having some tough times back then. Volunteers were dropping like flies. That's a whole other part of the story there, trying to get a team to work together in unison towards a goal when you're not paying them. If they're volunteers and they have a day job and kids at home, everything else takes priority. So it's really easy, for their interest to wane, and, for them to fall off to the wayside and not be necessarily productive for the organization. So in any case, I served as an officer with the Scout Sniper Association for a while, and we have term limits. And at the end of 6 years, I had to step down, and that would have been, December of 23. So I was getting prepared for that, starting to hand things off to my successor. It was actually before that, one of our other directors, who was at his term limits, he sent me an email and tying up loose ends. He says, "Hey, by the way, did you know that there's not a memorial to honor our war dead anywhere?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know. I mean, the Scout Sniper Association, we're all about having camaraderie events and taking care of our brothers and their families and things like that. I'm not worried about memorials or anything." And he said, "Yeah, no, there isn't one." Okay, so that led to some more discussions. And pretty soon it became apparent that, yeah, there wasn't one. And that sucks. Why isn't there one? And there's this whole memorial park up there by the National Museum of the Marine Corps outside of Quantico that's dedicated to different memorials for different communities of Marines. Some of those communities of Marines have multiple memorials in that one place, and we don't have one anywhere. So we thought, well, if anybody's going to do it, it's probably going to be us because nobody's going to do it for us. Very quickly, the discussion turned to, well, how do we go about it? We also very quickly determined that because of the fact that we're all volunteers and have day jobs, the guys that are running the association for the members, they're already tapped out. Their bandwidth is pretty full. So we probably need to set up a separate organization and get a whole nother separate set of leadership in place to be able to handle, the workload. And so that's what we did. So at the beginning of 24, we stood up the organization as a separate entity, and they made me the president of it, had me form a board, and we got the board in place by March of this past year. Got a great group of highly capable, very devoted men who want to see this happen. Most of whom are Scout Snipers, a few of whom are not. They're Marines, and they're great supporters of the community for various reasons.
That's excellent. So stop me if this makes you uncomfortable, but you made a comment earlier about how you kind of got out and you had kind of a tough couple of years and you got back in. And we've had a number of guests on over the last year that have come from the military. And it's pretty common, I think, for people to kind of feel lost when they get out and struggle with PTSD and ideation issues and things like that. So was it you feeling like you were kind of spinning a little bit? Was it a lack of sense of purpose? Is that?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I was a new husband, so there was the stress of trying to succeed at something I've never done before, which is have a real relationship. And, the loss of the steady income, having to go try to find a job in the civilian world that was not forthcoming. I had a real tough time, early 90s, trying to find a job, didn't have a degree. And yeah, there's this one story about Garmin. I went home to the Kansas City area, and Garmin Electronics is down there in Lenexa, Kansas. And I knew who they were. I'd used their products, their GPSs and different things. And I thought, man, I'll go down there and use my experience as a user, to help them develop products. I know what I'm doing, And I actually got a chance to, because I was sitting there in the HR room filling out an application, and it was late on a Friday, and some VP of whatever comes walking in, talking to the HR lady, and he turns around and says, "Hey, tell me, what's your story?" And I told him, "I'm just fresh out of the Marine Corps, looking for a job. I thought maybe I could help you guys out." And, "Oh yeah, you got time to walk around a little bit?" And so I did. So we took a tour. We walked around the whole facility, and he was showing me this and that. And by the end of the conversation, he was telling me he thought, I think you'd be a great fit in our RD. He told the HR lady, "Hey, let's have him come in on Monday and whatever." And he turns around and starts to walk out, and then he stops and he says, "Oh, sorry, I forgot to ask." He says, "Where'd you get your degree?" I said, "School of Hard Knocks. I don't have a degree. I'm a high school grad." And he's like, "Oh," and he said, "Man, I'm so sorry. I should have said something up front, but we don't have anything for you." I'm like, "Really?" Stuff like that. It was kind of like a kick in the crotch. And that was a big one. There were others. Yeah, I kind of felt like I was spinning out of control during that time and getting beat down a little bit. And, I was not anywhere around a bunch of Marines that I knew. I'm sure there were Marines in the area, but I didn't know them, and I just felt very alone and unafraid, so to speak, but I was more afraid than I wanted to admit. It took some years down the road before I really realized just how scary that time was.
Well, unfortunately, I don't think that's an uncommon occurrence, what you just described. I think a lot of guys go through that when they come out. And I would like to think hopefully things are getting better and there's more resources, but you tell me, is it getting better? Are we doing a better job supporting our guys or no?
People have programs and there's all sorts of stuff. There's all kinds of money getting thrown at it. And, you can't say people aren't trying. DOD, the VA, whatever. It's a problem that, number one, is never going to be completely mitigated. It will always be there. So no matter how much you prepare somebody who's getting ready to separate ahead of time, they're going to have the problem. A lot of it is determined by that individual's own personal disposition, their past, their own past history with mental health issues, emotional stability, things like that. And quite frankly, a lot of guys come in the military with a lot of baggage already, from their childhood. Guys just graduating high school, coming in the military. Kids go through a lot of crap in our society sometimes. And a lot of that stuff never sees the light of day until it manifests itself in some behavior later down the road. That's no different. We're just a microcosm of society. So that the military deals with that just like everybody in the civilian world. The difference is that in the military, we're placed under unique pressures, because we're all fighting America's wars, right? So there are obviously some unique pressures, intense pressures that are put on military members. It really, creates an environment for some of those things to rise to the surface. And even if you're able to stuff them, kind of just put it in the back, until you can make it through your 4 years or however long you spend in the military, at some point it's coming out.
I was about to say it's coming out,
Yeah.
right?
It's
And it's going to be
yeah,
ugly when
whether
it
you
comes
think it
out.
is or not, it's all going to come out at some point. And that's, you can't predict those things.
Well, that's something I think about that a lot, and it's certainly something as a country and as a society we needed to be better at.
Yeah, I agree.
That's probably a hard thing to talk about, so I appreciate you having approaching this with so much candor.
It's not that hard. I'm some years removed from it, so so for me, it's maybe a little easier. I got grandkids now, and my perspective has changed. So if you'd asked me 10 years ago, yeah, it'd be a different conversation.
Well, as somebody who read a book in high school and said, "Man, that sounds like a pretty awesome adventure. I want to do that," and then you went and did it, and then you were involved at the highest levels of leadership of the foundation, and now you're leading this affiliated foundation. I imagine you're spending a lot of time immersed in sort of the history and the stories and the legacy of Marine Scout snipers. Can you share a couple stories? Like, I have to imagine you know some pretty good ones of guys that over the years have done some amazing stuff. What don't people know about these heroes and what they've done for our country?
We're a little bit unique in the military. I talked earlier about how we don't have officers who are scout snipers typically. I mean, there are a handful out there, but we've never been structured in such a way that we have a whole unit where everybody, like anything larger than a platoon. Like, we don't have companies and battalions of snipers where the company commander, the executive officer, the battalion commander, they're all snipers. That's not the case. It never has been the case. We've always been just a platoon, which, a platoon is typically 30, 40 guys, whatever. And you may have one officer who is a platoon leader. For a large part of our history, we didn't even have that. When I served, we had the intelligence officer for the battalion. He was given the collateral duty of being our officer in charge. So his primary duty was being on the battalion commander's special staff as the intelligence officer for the battalion. But in his off time, he was supposed to manage us. During that time, a lot of intel officers kind of had a hands-off approach. It's like, as long as you stay out of trouble and I don't have to get involved, you do your own thing, whatever. And that can be good and bad. It can be good from the perspective of, if you've got a bunch of responsible young Marines who have been to sniper school and know their job and can train and do things on their own. That's awesome, because now you have the freedom to just go train and get good at it. And we did that for a while. But then there's also, the opportunity, because of the lack of supervision, young Marines get in trouble, and you also get overlooked when it comes to larger picture things. When you're just off training on your own, you're training individual skills or team skills. But what about skills in support of a company, which is, maybe 150 men, or skills in support of the battalion, which is, 1,000 guys? Different sized operations require different skill sets, different techniques. And if you don't practice them, you can't get good at them. And if you're just off on your own, you're just doing the individual and team stuff. And if the officer has that sort of hands-off mentality, they're never going to put you in the play of the problem, or very rarely. And even if they do, they might do it in the wrong way. Because they aren't trained scout snipers, some of the officers, even who were interested and wanted to use us, they didn't know how. They were never taught in their own training track how to properly employ scout snipers. They relied on us for that knowledge. And for the young enlisted guy to be teaching the officer his job as it relates to us, sometimes it was like the blind leading the blind. There's a lot of that kind of dynamic going on throughout our history. But, to get back to your original question, one of the most interesting things that we have discovered since we came up with the concept of a Scout Sniper Memorial, we randomly found a piece of information in the form of a photograph You ever seen one of these old, like long panoramic pictures that's like 3 feet long and maybe 10 inches or a foot high, and it's like a class graduation photo kind of thing from college or
Yeah,
whatever?
yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, so, back in the day, they used to do that all the time, and people would get hard copies, and somebody, at some point found a photograph like that of a bunch of old Marines from the turn of the last century, and at the bottom of the photograph in the center, now we don't have the actual photograph, we have a picture of the center of the photograph. It got sold on eBay to somebody, and, we're trying to track that down, but on the bottom of the photograph, they write the caption, like, class whatever of such and such school. It said United States Marines, Scout Sniper School, Quantico, Virginia, November 13th, 1918. It's kind of blew our mind, because we're thinking if you'd asked any scout sniper who's currently serving today, how far back do scout snipers go? Probably 90% of them will tell you Vietnam. That's as far back as we go,
Yeah, we're talking over a century.
over a century, 105
In
years. Yeah.
1918, is that like pre-Garand? Like, what are they even shooting with?
No,
back
the
then?
Grand didn't exist back then, man. This is older than that. So yeah, we went back to Korea, where they actually didn't have a formal program during Korea. But then we go back to World War II, right? The war in the Pacific and all that, and there was a formal program. We had two formal schools, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast. During World War II, we had a table of organization. So we had a structure for a unit. We had units that employed those guys in combat on both Tarawa and Saipan, where they employed an entire platoon of scout snipers as a cohesive unit
Oh, wow.
in the main assault on Tarawa and Saipan. We didn't know that. Some guys who were very well read in their Marine Corps history may have known that they had some kind of snipers in World War II. And there was a lieutenant by the name of William Dean Hawkins who was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions on Tarawa. And he was a scout sniper platoon commander. That's kind of public knowledge, but people don't really read into it to see what does that mean. Well, obviously it means he commanded a platoon of scout snipers, but nobody ever dug to see what this scout sniper platoon consisted of. Obviously there were scout snipers in it, or else they wouldn't call it that, And so how did we make these scout snipers? There actually was a school. Two of them, one on each coast. And then, going back even further, I don't think any of us knew that there were snipers in World War One. But we now have photographic evidence as well as a bunch of documentation showing that there was a school at Quantico, and they called it Scout Sniper School. So it was the two words together. A lot of the training that they were receiving was very similar to the training that I received in 1990 and 1991. They taught them how to build a ghillie suit. They taught them how to build a hide, as a final firing position. They taught them how to estimate range, long range shooting, all that kind of stuff, how to collect and report information, and it was all oriented towards the technology of the day, which wasn't much, but it's what they had. They used those guys as runners a lot because they didn't have radios. So how are you going to get the information back? Got to be a runner. You got to write it down on a piece of paper and get it to the commander back in the rear. It was the same concept. They were collecting and reporting information, and they were shooting at long range, precision, rifle fires. Yeah, 1918 was kind of the formation, the origin story for our community.
I'm curious if you can speak to this. One of the things that I think kind of comes with age and wisdom and all that is, when I certainly in my experience, as a young man, I was pretty impulsive. And if something pissed me off, I was ready to rock and roll and let everyone know it. I also, if I wanted something, I want it right now. A lesson I'm still learning as I'm getting older is that's usually the wrong approach. Impulsiveness doesn't typically help any situation. I don't shoot super long range like that, but even my time at the range is practicing and stuff, I have found that like usually if you wait, let your heart rate come down, take some breaths, even like hunting, things like that, like the longer you wait, usually the conditions improve and your situation improves and your accuracy improves. And I found that in business and leadership, and I still have to fight this myself, like if I can figure out how to ignore my first impulse reaction to things, I usually can become more clear-headed and just wait, and the situation usually becomes more clear. When you're out in the field, and not just when you're a scout sniper, but even later in your career when you're in the service and Corps, is that something that you learned, and is that something you had to teach your guys under you as you kind of went through your service, that like patience is a virtue, and like how to kind of wait for things to develop and how to kind of understand the environment around you?
Yeah.
And like, can you talk to that a little bit? Like what was that experience like for you?
No, absolutely. And I'll just preface the whole thing with saying that I still have not learned it, still working on it. But yeah, back in my day, when I went through sniper school, the big catchword was equanimity, right? And equanimity is essentially the ability to keep your cool under pressure and not make rash decisions, think things through, but don't think too long, be decisive, make a decision, but think. always think. You have to think about it. You have to practice it to get good at it. And honestly, looking back, hindsight being 2020, I probably was never really all that good at it myself. I'm kind of rash too, and I kind of always am impatient and want things the way I want them yesterday, right? Having that word in my head and knowing that it's there and it's something that I should strive for has helped me, in those times when it mattered to actually be able to do that occasionally, just enough to, to be somewhat successful. And it is important. I think some of the most successful people out there are the ones that are able to sort of take the heat of the moment or the emotion out of their decision making, have a clarity of thought that they're able to think logically. And it may be that their first impulse ends up being correct. And that may be what they ultimately act on, but they don't act on it in the moment. They take an extra heartbeat or two to consider it. What are the options? Okay, that's the right option. Great, let's do it. But if it's not, it gives them that breathing space to kind of devise another option. And obviously, when you're talking about, military operations, high speed things, things are moving fast, your timeline gets compressed. Sometimes your ability to take more moments to think about it is taken away from you. So you have to be able to think more quickly and be more decisive. In daily life, there are precious few of those times where we really have to make a decision that quickly. And so if we do, we're shortchanging ourselves, and I've done that a lot, believe me, even post Marine Corps, all the lessons that I've been taught, not necessarily, learned and taken hold of, but I still make those kinds of mistakes sometimes where my gut tells me that this is what I should do. And I just do it because maybe I'm in my own little silo. Maybe I haven't surrounded myself with enough people that are willing to throw another option at me or just say, hey, take a pause, take a breath, but I'll tell you, this team that we've got here at the Scout Sniper Heritage Foundation, good bunch of guys. That's one of the things I really appreciate about all of them. They're all willing to speak up. They're all willing to say, hey, what about this? Or, hey, what about that? And talk it through. Nobody comes to the table saying, no, don't do that, unless it's like a catastrophic thing that if I do it, we're going to die. If they don't think I should do A, then they'll come up with B and suggest it, bring a solution to the table. It's kind of one of the things that I was always taught as a young NCO. Don't just argue against a plan of action unless you have an alternative.
Boy,
yeah,
I wouldn't mind sending that memo out to some people I know. So that's a good one.
Yeah.
So that's great, Tim. And I'm sorry, you talked about the group that you're working with, and I'm curious, can you give us a little more of an understanding about your primary mission, as an extension of the main association of your group is it sounds like you really want to get this memorial built. So what does that mean? Like, is that just like a fundraising thing, or do you guys have to like go through loopholes to get it? Like, I don't know how that works. How do you get a memorial built?
That's an interesting question. And, for different organizations trying to build different memorials, it might be vastly different. But for us in our situation, we've already decided that the location of our memorial is going to be the Semper Fidelis Memorial Park, which is outside of the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Triangle, Virginia. And so that's just outside the front gate of Marine Corps Base Quantico. The National Museum of the Marine Corps is a fantastic facility. It's a great benefit to the Marine Corps. It's a sort of a touchstone where every Marine can go and show their family, their friends, and say, look, this is what I was. I was a part of this. And right outside of the museum, kind of off to the left as you're approaching from the parking lot, there's this pathway that starts to wind through the woods. And along that pathway are all these different memorials and monuments, plaques and different statues, all kinds of things. They've been placed there by all sorts of different Marine Corps affiliated organizations that represent anything from a officer candidate class from the 1950s that may have had a high number of graduates that became general officers. There's a statue to honor war dogs. It's a really cool bronze of a Doberman Pinscher that I love. The Korean War Memorial is really cool. It's one of the bigger ones in the park, and it honors all Marines, that fought in Korea or served in Korea since the war. But yeah, there's all sorts of different memorials there, different sizes and shapes and flavors. But that's the perfect setting for us because, as I said, the origins of our history, it all started right there at Quantico. That first class in the summer of 1918 was at Quantico. The museum is kind of like the Smithsonian. It's open to the public year-round, free of charge. It's only closed one day a year, I think. It's a great place for us to put a monument. We've already chosen a site that we want it to be at. It's all the way in the back. If you follow that trail all the way down through the woods, and the land starts to go up a little bit and rise. And it's not like we're on a mountaintop looking down on everything, but it is the highest elevation in the park.
I like it. So you're going for the high ground. I like it.
Yeah, kind of going for the Overwatch position, right? So it is a really good site. And if I got to give directions, I just tell them just keep on walking all the way to the back. So we have to purchase that. That's going to cost us about $110,000 just to purchase the ground that it sits on. And that's the same for everybody that wants to get a memorial site that size. So that's a pretty big lift. We haven't done that yet. I'll tell you, our fundraising goal is $3 million for the memorial. And just very quickly, the memorial is just one of our projects. Our mission covers other things, and we can talk about that later. But the memorial obviously is the biggest priority right now. But we have a team. We've got Sabin Howard, who's a master sculptor. He's the guy that that created the sculpture for the National World War I Memorial that's in Pershing Square in DC. That was just unveiled in September. He worked almost a decade on that thing, and it's a magnificent work of art. We met him about a year and a half ago, and he wants to do our project, and we want him, but we got to be able to pay him. So yeah, it is about fundraising. Absolutely. All the other stuff, we've pretty well got it figured out. People say, well, you're going to build a memorial. How are you going to maintain it? Well, at the Semper Fidelis Memorial Park, we don't have to maintain it. They follow the rules of I guess it's the National Battlefield Commission or whatever it's called. In any case, the agreement is that once we build it and place it in the park, we will sign over a deed of gift to the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation. And of course, they've got a fairly large endowment, and they're responsible for maintaining that memorial in perpetuity. So it's no longer our responsibility to maintain it.
So you got to buy the land, and then you got to figure out how to raise the money to create it. But once it's in place, they'll run it.
That's exactly right. So if a tree falls on it, some kid climbs on it and breaks a piece, natural disaster, whatever, they would replace, parts, fix it, whatever, pay the sculptor to come back and repair, whatever. I mean, it's an amazing location. We've got a great design that basically depicts two-man team of scout snipers. And since we go back to World War I, we decided to have the observer, a World War I guy wearing the doughboy helmet. He got a 1903 Springfield rifle slung over his shoulder, and he's sort of standing and crouching, and he's pointing into the distance or into the future, if you will, and has his other hand on the shoulder of the shooter. And the shooter is an Afghanistan era scout sniper. And that depicts the last combat deployment for Marine Scout snipers with the infantry, which was Abbey Gate. And so that's the bookends of our history. World War I, Abbey Gate. Two-man team has been sort of the standard element for scout snipers for many, many years. And so every scout sniper today will recognize the two-man team. And there's some tweaks to the design that we're talking about already. We're probably not going to have the shooter actually behind the rifle sighting in. Probably going to have him positioned a little differently. We're trying to create some symbolism here. You've had other Marines on the show, I know. Are you familiar with the Marine Corps birthday ceremony? Every November 10th, we go out and raise holy hell everywhere that Marines are and drink a lot and party. Yeah. So there's a lot of ceremony in our Marine Corps celebration. The cake cutting ceremony is one of those things. And in the cake cutting ceremony, the commanding officer or the guest of honor will cut the first piece of cake with a sword, and he'll hand that piece of cake to the oldest Marine present. The oldest Marine will take a bite, and he'll hand it to the youngest Marine present. So you got some really old dude like me, and then you got some young kid right out of boot camp. While they're doing that, there's a narrator reading the script that talks about how this is symbolizing passing of knowledge and experience from one generation of Marines to the next. And we're hoping that through the positioning of our figures in the statue, that passing of knowledge and experience is conveyed. The observer has a hand on the shoulder and he's pointing to the future, kind of showing the way. But yeah, so we've got a 35-foot diameter circle to work with for the site. So it'll be the statue on a pedestal with a surround. Got an architect hard at work on it right now, and we're trying to get enough money to get Sabin Howard to provide some of his original art. The conceptual drawings that we've got on our website, of course, you can go to scoutsniperheritage.org and see those conceptual drawings. We paid a guy named Ben Cantwell who actually does really great work. He's a tattoo artist. He's not a sculptor. The drawings that he did, we've been marinating on those for a while. He did a great job of pulling the concept out of my head and putting it on paper for us so that we had some kind of an initial image. When Sabin starts putting pen to paper and creates some sketches and stuff, it's going to be really special.
That's really cool. I think it's a noble thing you're doing. How can people help?
Yeah, so you can find us on all the social media channels. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, X, and Instagram. We also have a YouTube channel that doesn't have much on it at the moment, but it will. And our website is scoutsniperheritage.org. We got a lot of information on there. There's lots of information about how to give. Since March, so it's been about 9 months now, we've raised about $150,000. But obviously, because we're just getting started up, a lot of that has been paid out in expenses. We had to build a website, we had to print flyers and pay to have a booth at different events this past year and things like that. And so there's expenses, as with any organization, any company. We are a company, we just happen to be a nonprofit one. The only revenue we have is through the sale of swag and things like that, and donations. So yeah, absolutely, donations is at the top of the list. We have a pretty cool donor scheme for major donors, $5,000 and above, where we have some really unique items that we're creating that are very custom, very limited edition, that will be gifts for people who want to give at that level. But man, we can use all the $5 donations we can get. And we have a donate button, just hit it. But I'll tell you, and this goes back to, what I said earlier about our community being so small. Very few people really know who we are. They've heard of us. If you go to a bar, everybody's a Scout Sniper, or they're a Navy SEAL, or they're both. But they're really not. So our reach is relatively small. We only have a few hundred followers on our social media accounts. So just sharing and liking our posts, getting the word out. We're looking for people to, maybe folks who are pretty well connected, to be able to make some introductions. Last year, when I went to SHOT Show for the first time repping the Scout Sniper Heritage Foundation, I decided that my ask, instead of cash, I'd be asking for Rolodexes. It's like, hey man, if you're a business owner and you're well connected in the business world, and you think this is something you could support, don't write me a check. Pick up your phone or get on your email and email some of your well-connected friends and say, hey man, I got something you should take a look at, and maybe host an event for us. I'll go anywhere in the country to run an event. I'll do all the legwork. I'll put it together. But events like that, we're doing one in Corpus Christi. There's a former Marine who owns an aviation company down there at the airport. Atlantic Aviation has offered the use of their hangar to do a hangar party. And so we're doing a gala fundraiser April 12th. Down there. Got a couple other ones in the works in different locations. Definitely could use connections like that, just getting introduced.
A lot of our listeners are many have served, many have not, but a lot of them are, I would say most of our listeners that I've spoken to are patriots, and they do appreciate everyone who puts on a uniform and serves the country. So I think, to those of you listening out there, I think what Tim is doing is honorable and noble, and he represents a group of guys that are really on the front line and have sacrificed for their country. So I think it's an honorable thing. So give us the URL one more time, Tim, of where they can go to learn more.
Yeah, scoutsniperheritage.org.
Excellent. Well, Tim, I appreciate your service. I appreciate what you're doing now with the Scout Sniper Heritage Foundation and this mission. And I want to thank you for joining us. So to Tim Parkhurst, I want to say thank you for joining us on Only the Strong Survive. For those of you at home that want to support the Marine Scout Sniper Heritage Foundation, please check out their website. I hope you all have a great day. Please like, share, and subscribe to this episode if you liked it. Thanks, everybody.